All right, so where we left off was talking about we had opened the cloud image, and I was discussing a little bit about the image size and why that's important. So we'll go to image size is basically when you're creating the brush, you want the image to be as large as possible because for example, if you have a brush or a photo like this cloud, and let's say it was only, 3 inches by 3 inches large, that's as large as that brush will ever be able to be. So you can try to increase the size of the brush you create, but after it reaches, let's say, that 3-inch by 3-inch threshold, the image is going to start to become pixelated. So starting with a large file is always a good idea. And the largest you can go is actually 2,500 pixels in one direction. So if I update this to 2,500 pixels, the largest side, that will make the image as large as a brush can actually go. So that's the first step to creating a brush, is just making sure the image is as large as possible when you open it. The next thing to pay attention to when we're creating brushes is actually the black colors and the white colors that are showing up in the image. So right now we have our cloud, we have lots of grays, and we can actually heighten some of these colors or this contrast by playing with our layer adjustments. So I can go to, let's play with our adjustments over here. I'm going to play around with my levels. And I'm going to just play around with these toggles so that the darks become darkers and the lights become lighter. But you don't want to go too much that you start to lose information. So just be careful with that. So I think that is starting somewhere around there. Should be a good amount of information. So, yep, those 2 steps. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, your face is all disappeared, so or the whole window disappeared. Okay, there we go. So the last step to create the brush is to go up to edit. I believe it's edit. Let's see here. Edit. Maybe it's file. Hold on a moment, guys. I forgot the command here to use. Oh, you know what? I think I have to be selecting the image itself. Maybe that's why. Let's see here. There, yeah, okay, that's what the problem was. So make sure if you use any adjustment layers, when you go to save, just, well, first let's make sure we apply these to the actual layer itself. So let me read you some of this. So I'm gonna hit delete. I'm not gonna do this as a layer mask. I'm gonna do it by editing the object itself. So I'm gonna go to image adjustments, and I'm going to go to levels, And I'm gonna do that similar action. I'm gonna make the whites whiter and the darks darker. I'll hit OK. Okay, so now that I have this layer selected, all you need to go is to File, or sorry, Edit, and we're gonna go to Define Brush Preset. So I'm just gonna select that. And here, it's gonna ask you for a name. So I'm just gonna type in cloud, and we're gonna hit OK. And that creates the brush. You'll see that automatically opens my brush tool. And so when you create that brush preset, it actually adds that brush to your Photoshop library. So no matter what file you're in, if we go over to this project, you'll see that my brush automatically carries over to this file as well. So now I can use this tool, the brush tool, and I can select my white color, and I'll increase the opacity. And now I can actually start to paint in clouds. So I don't have to go and find an image of a sky with clouds. I can actually create however many brushes I want, and just start to paste them or stamp them in. So another thing with brushes is you can stamp just by clicking, and you can also drag. But of course, when we drag, you get this sort of streaky brush that happens. So how can we actually start to drag our paintbrush that has this texture and have it still have that stamped quality? So to do that, you can go over to Window and select Brush Settings. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And that brings up this dialog box here. And you'll notice here to the side, there's a bunch of different options that you could play around with: scattering, texture, etc. Right now we are under brush tip shape. And over here, you'll see that there's an option to play around with the spacing. If I increase the size of the spacing, you'll see here that the brush is updating. And I can have them super spaced out or somewhere in between. And when I go and paint with that brush, you'll see how they're kind of more spaced out over here. In addition, there's also options for scattering. And if you go under scattering and select scattering option, you can increase scattering. You'll see that that also changes the location, or quite obviously named, it scatters the paintbrush tool. So when I start to paint, let me just decrease this, you'll see that it's actually quite random how that's placed throughout the sky there. The last one that's also really useful to know is, what is it, shape dynamics? Let me refresh my memory here. Color dynamics. Depth jitter. So there's roundness jitter, which actually decreases the roundness of the object. There's size jitter, so you can play around with the size. So if I increase some of these, you'll see that this cloud is still very large, but the other ones get small. So that's another thing you can do. There's an option that also rotates. There we go, it's angle jitter. So if you play around with the angle jitter, you could also make it even more random, so that when you paint as a paintbrush, the cloud texture happens in all different rotations, it scatters differently, etc. So While that might not be so useful for clouds, for example, one thing you can do is you can create, for example, if you're doing a rendering in fall, and you want your Photoshop rendering to look like there's a bunch of leaves flowing through the scene, you can create a brush texture of a leaf, and you can play around with these brush settings so that it looks like there's foliage falling from the trees. Do you guys have any questions about that? This is all recorded, so you'll be able to go back and see how I did all of that again. Felix, I can't hear you at the moment. Felix, I can't hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. All right. I can hear, I think.
Felix, you wanted to talk to my man? Okay. I don't know what to say. Okay. I said the challenge, I think the question I wanted to ask is how you move from the previous page, like is it copy? Because the brush there is different from, you know, the cloud that comes within.
You mean how
Yes.
did I go from here to?
Yes.
So when I created the brush, all I did was I had this image open and I went to edit and I selected define brush preset. So when I did that, I gave it a name. When you do that brush, define brush preset command, that automatically saves the brush type that you've created into your Photoshop. So even though I'm saving it, it looks like I'm saving it here, it's actually saving it throughout your actual Photoshop program. So when I go to any file, it doesn't matter if it's this file or this file, when I go and select a brush, for example, let's go to my paintbrush tool. All I need to do is go up to my brush tools, and you'll see here there's different options. I have one for a watercolor texture that I created a while ago, or I can go and find that cloud texture that I just created. So when you save it using the define brush preset, you're actually saving it to your Photoshop, the overall program, not just the one file. Does that make sense?
Yes. I guess now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. That was a good question. All right, so any other questions about brushes? Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, and I guess I'll try to do this as quickly as I can for Bao's sake, because I know he's leaving soon, is I wanted to discuss the idea of smart objects within Photoshop. So what are smart objects? Let me start by just opening some images. And I'm gonna explain this by using an image of a bird. So smart objects are a way in Photoshop to basically edit objects without being destructive. So what does that mean? For example, let's bring in this bird into the Farnsworth rendering. So I'm gonna just place this bird somewhere here, and I'm going to copy one of these birds over. And one of these birds I'm going to turn into a smart object. And to do that, what I'm going to do here is So my layer 14 is the one on the left. We'll call that one bird 1. And the one on the right we'll call bird 2. Bird 2, I'm going to turn into a smart object. And to turn it into a smart object, I'm going to right-click the layer, and I'm going to select Convert to Smart Object. And you know it becomes a smart object when you see here on the little icon, there's a little symbol that pops up on the little square here. So that's how you know whether or not it's a smart object. So what is a smart object? A smart object allows you to perform transformations. It allows you to edit objects without losing data or information about your different layers. So for example, right now, I have both of these birds selected, and I'm going to, let's bring them closer together. I'm going to select both of them, and I'm going to transform them, and I'm going to make them very, very large. So I'm going to hit enter. All right, so let's zoom in here. We're going to notice right now that quality-wise, they both look pretty good, pretty similar right now. Watch what happens when I shrink them back down. So I'm going to make both of them very small. I'm going to hit enter. And now I'm going to increase the size of the birds again. Now I'm going to hit enter. Again, it looks pretty okay. Here's our smart object and here's our normal object. You'll notice that there's some information that's beginning to get lost. So if I zoom in here, let's look at the face of this bird. It looks pretty clear still. If I move over to this one, you'll see here that the quality of the image is actually getting a lot worse. So let's do this one more time and see what happens. I'm going to shrink this down. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to bring it back larger again. And now you can really see the difference between the two images. One is pretty clear, and one is just getting worse and worse and worse. Does that sort of explain to you guys what a smart object does? It allows you to create transformations without losing information. So I'm going to delete the non-smart object. Just going to hit delete. Now, smart objects actually allow you to edit your object layer outside of the Photoshop file so that you can, no matter what, go back to the original state of this image. So, for example, let's say I wanted to play around with the color of this bird in Photoshop. How can I do that without being destructive? As you know, for example, let's actually bring this bird back. If I go to image adjustments, hue saturation, if I start playing with these color options, I'm doing this in a destructive way. There's no way, let's say if I keep making edits in Photoshop, there's no way you will be able to go back to the original image of the bird without having to bring in the file in brand new. So, for example, if I created the smart object, and I'm going to go back to the smart object here, if I double click on this icon over here, it's going to ask me after editing these contents, you need to save the file. That's okay. I'm just going to hit OK. And that's going to open up this image in a new tab over here. And I'm going to create some adjustments, and I always like to use my adjustments layer over here. So I'm just gonna, for example, let's play with the hue and, or I guess brightness and contrast. Let's make that very bright and play with the contrast. Let's also play with something more obvious, the hue and saturation. We can make it orange. So if I go and hit save here, so I'm going to go to File, Save. Watch what happens when I go back to the original image. Automatically, the bird updates to be that orange color in this file. But if I ever wanted to go back and put this bird back to its original state, let's say down the line, I'm creating this rendering, and I'm like, I don't like these colors, I don't like how this is coming out. I can always go back by double clicking here, and I could turn off these adjustments that I've created, and I can go and hit save, and when I do that, I can go back to my file and it automatically updates. So essentially the smart object option here allows you to begin editing images in a way that allows you to go back to your original image file. And any edits that I create in this over here will update in the Photoshop file. So I can make this smaller, edit, transform, flip horizontal. I can flip them, and if I hit save, I can go back, and now I have two birds here. So one thing to know about smart objects, and this is really important for anyone who works on a school computer. As you guys noticed, smart objects are linked to an external file. So this is saving as a PSB, which is a file that's located elsewhere on the computer. So if you're working on the school computer, as some of you may already know, your work does not save always to school computers. So if you're using smart objects on a school computer, just know that those links, if you save your Photoshop file and try to reopen it there, or if you try to open the same Photoshop file on another computer, those links are going to get broken, and you will no longer be able to see any of the transformations to the object you've created. So only use smart objects when you are using Photoshop on a personal computer that you know you'll be able to find those links. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to stop recording.